Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us in such numbers for this special event at the John Adams Institute. And I happen to know that we have quite a contingent of Minnesotans with us this evening. Let yourselves be heard. And a warm welcome, of course, for our guest of honor this evening, the Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz. For the moment, you'll just have to make do with me. My name is Tracy Metz, and I'm the director of the John Adams Institute. Our guest this evening is the 41st governor of Minnesota. His mission throughout his whole career has been public service, from serving in the military, to serving as a high school teacher, to serving as a football coach, to serving in Congress. Tim won his first election to the United States House of Representatives in 2006 and was re-elected for another 5 terms, serving Minnesota's 1st congressional district. Rumor has it that he might be on his way to the Senate. Maybe we'll hear more about that this evening, and maybe not. Many of you will know that our mission at the John Adams Institute is to bring the best and the brightest of American thinking to the Netherlands. Some people think that means that we are promoting America or promoting the Dutch-American relationship. Especially in the light of recent events, this is a good moment to mention that we are not promoting anything. We bring interesting speakers from the US, the best and the brightest, and leave it up to you to make up your own mind. Especially now when the Dutch-American relationship, indeed, the entire European-American relationship, stands in, shall I say, a stark new light. It's rare for us to be able to host a politician who is in office, let alone a governor who recently ran for the office of vice president. And of course, the timing couldn't have been better. You might even think that we'd planned it that way. I'm not sure, but I think I speak for many of us here when I say that this past weekend, I could not help wondering how different the tone and the words would have been at the Security Council in Munich. A weekend for the history books. I am so glad that we have Tim Walz with us now to reflect on the state of affairs within the US and the rest of the world. Many thanks to our sponsors, and thanks too to our private donors, our family, our friends, associates, and members. You really do make all of this possible, as we have no subsidy from any government, neither the Dutch nor the American government. We are fiercely independent. That's important right now. Now I'll hand the floor over to our moderators for this evening, Laila Frank, journalist, podcaster, and TV commentator on the US, and Anne van Zoest, director of the Netherlands Atlantic Association.
Welcome allemaal. Welcome to our beautiful city. For those who are from Minnesota visiting, my name is Laila Frank. I'm a journalist specialized in US politics, where I spend a great amount of my time.
And my name is Anne van Zoest. I'm director of the Netherlands Atlantic Association, a center for debate on NATO and the transatlantic bond.
Yeah, so how it's going to go down tonight. We're not a presidential debate, but we're sort of strictly organized tonight. First, we're going to have some opening remarks by Governor Tim Walz. Then I will sit down with the governor for a conversation about domestic issues. Then we have an intermezzo by our program director, Ian, and he promised it will not be karaoke, so don't worry. I'll hand it over to Anna, who's going to talk to Governor Walz about everything that's not domestic, but so very urgent.
And so much to talk about, and we're on a very tight schedule, so we will not be taking questions from the audience, but you've all been very generous in sharing your questions with us ahead of this event, so Laila and I will do our best to wrap them up in our conversations with Governor Walz.
So, without further ado, please a warm Amsterdam welcome for Governor Tim Walz.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. We could have used a few of you in Detroit, apparently. So, to Tracy and Ian here at the John Adams Institute, thank you for the kind invitation. I heard Tracy say the best and brightest from the United States. It's a pretty thin bench, apparently, right now. So, as you've been witnessing. But thank you all. You've got busy lives. There's a lot of places you could have gone, but you came here tonight. And I'm under no illusion you didn't just come here to see me. You came here because you care deeply about the world, and you care about the interconnectedness and the decisions that are made and how it's going to impact us, our planet, and future generations. And for that, I'm grateful. I'm here in the Netherlands on this trip was planned as the governor of Minnesota on a trade mission. Minnesota, for many of you know, if you want to find it, you look at the map of North America and you find the world's largest freshwater lake, and that's Lake Superior, and that's us right next to it in Minnesota. We are Scandinavian, the most Scandinavian of the states, with a lot of Norwegian and Northern European background. I was once in a political debate where my opponent said, Tim is trying to turn Minnesota into a Northern European economy. And I agreed with him at the debate. I said, yes, because we believe investing in our people. It's why Minnesota is ranked first in healthcare access. It's why we have the longest life expectancies. It's why we have some of the highest personal incomes, some of the highest education levels. We are a center of American agriculture and technologies around that, home of Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution. And we're the global center of medical devices and medical advancements with the Mayo Clinic and the University of Minnesota, and we pride ourselves on that. We also, in those rankings, consistently rank in the top 3 happiest states in America. And we usually rank behind Hawaii, but it is 33 below zero today in Minnesota. So I heard some of you saying the weather was chilly, but we're here to talk about trade. We're here to talk about it. But it would be tone deaf and it would be irresponsible not to recognize the moment we're in. And I, like you, heard the Vice President's word from Munich last week, heard the words of the Defense Secretary as it related to the Russian invasion of sovereign Ukraine, and lack of imagination, maybe, by my part. What these guys do doesn't surprise me so much, but I have to tell you, the idea of American Secretary of State meeting with Sergei Lavrov in Riyadh to discuss the future of European security without any European leadership there was something I didn't anticipate. I anticipated a lot from them. Someone said, what did you learn from this campaign? I've learned to say it can't get worse. Unfortunately, it's true. And I say that to you as we landed on Sunday. It's a relatively short mission. This was unfolding in front of us. And we had a little time on Sunday, and we went to the Anne Frank house, which I had been there before as a younger man. And I was reflecting after we left on Sunday that as a younger man, that felt like a historical experience. Sunday, it felt like a cautionary experience. And I feel like, and to share with you, that's the moment we're in. And we're going to have a conversation on domestic policy, economics, and it's going to be bifurcated into international affairs. We know that you can't separate those so clearly, but I think the Institute is right in how they're doing this and to look at it. And if you look up here, American federalism gives sub-federal levels of government, especially states, a lot of autonomy to do the things that they can do. And many of my fellow governors who disagree with the direction that things are going are using their power to shore up firewalls against some of what we see as the most destructive policies. The question, and this is the discussion we will move into here, is how do you view that with what's happening federally? Because I would, just as this conversation starts, the Vice President's speech in Munich is this administration's policies, so it is the official position of the United States government. I can assure you in this room, it is not the majority of opinion of Americans as it deals with international relationships, especially with the ties to the European Union and each of the sovereign nations. So the question, and I met this morning with members of Parliament, what is that going to look like? And I recognize this is a very unusual conversation because traditionally, if there is such a thing left in America, traditionally, we left our politics at water's edge and spoke with a unified voice. Now, I'm in a kind of a unique position that I'm sure they will say it's, sour grapes that I'm speaking at. The reason I can't leave my politics at is because I can't morally support a position where we are apparently negotiating a peace with an aggressor to a sovereign European nation without any input from the neighbors. And I think the moment we're in is, what does the global world order look like that those of us in this room for the last 80 years have seen as, while not perfect, it stood for human rights. It stood for the liberal democracies. It stood for a sharing of ideas to improve humanity. And the question is that order changing this week, if you will, in real time? So I'm grateful. My assumption is you probably came here because you're asking those same questions. And someone said, well, what's the solution? And I said, well, if I knew that, I would have been giving the speech in Munich last week and not here in Amsterdam tonight. So I obviously didn't know it. But my hope is that we fall back on the relationships that are deeply steeped in culture. They're deeply steeped in similar moral values. They're steeped in the history. They're steeped in the idea that all of our securities are tied together. All of our futures are closely tied together. And there's a saying by the late Senator Paul Wellstone in Minnesota. It's a very simple one that drives kind of our politics there is, we all do better when we all do better. So I'm here today and working with our friends and companies to ways that we can make sure we can make it better for all of our citizens. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for spending the time, and I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. So thank you. Kind of comfortable.
Thank you, Governor. Okay, I don't have a food fetish, but this is the best way to, be mindful of your time. So if I'm looking at your feet, I'm not.
Okay.
I want to start by, on behalf of all the people of Philadelphia, where I currently reside, wishing you a happy Eagles Month, Coach. Yeah, go Eagles!
Those of you know we are long-suffering Minnesota Vikings fans. But I do have to say, I was with the Eagles on this one.
Thank you.
I'm tired of Kansas City.
We appreciate it. And
Not to mention, the last time the Eagles won the Super Bowl, they boycotted the White House visit with President Trump. So there you go.
We appreciate the applause, but we're strict on time, so keep it till the end, if you wish. Governor Walz, it's fun to
I was enjoying that. I don't get it often.
I shouldn't have started about football. Rookie mistake. It's fun to talk about wins, Governor Walz, but we have to talk about the last elections before we can talk about what's going on right now. And there are a lot of opinions floating around within the Democratic Party about what happened and why. There is, up until now, no formal DNC autopsy, which, gains criticism of itself. We're a couple months in. Where has your thinking about what happened evolved into?
Yeah, and this, look, for me personally, like I said, I anticipated they were going where they were going, so I feel a sense of responsibility to this. Not for me as that woe is me. It's because the most vulnerable amongst us are going to pay a heavy price in this. That's what this was all about. And trying to understand and looking, because I do know this, our policies, and Vice President Harris, that she put out in the shared democratic values, advocating for paid family and medical leave, advocating for expansion of health care, advocating for home care for seniors, advocating for affordable college education, advocating for a climate policy that works globally. Those things are very popular. And I was out there trying to make the case the best I could, trying to talk about an optimistic future, and I've done this for 6 federal elections and twice for governor. It felt like we could win, and I don't think deluding ourselves. The policies were right. You could probably critique that were the messengers not good enough, perhaps not, but for whatever reason, a large number of voters stayed home. Donald Trump got the votes. Look, I've always said this. People were going to vote for Donald Trump. If you're willing to go buy a shirt that shows Donald Trump all muscled up and carry a flag around, hell or high water, you're going to go vote for that guy. Our problem was people didn't feel motivated enough to come out or recognize what was there. So I think what Democrats, again, I'm not a pundit on this, but I feel a sense of responsibility. We are not feeling where the zeitgeist of American communications are. We're not getting to people. I was making the case over and over, the middle class. I thought this was a flex. I was the first candidate on a presidential ticket in over 4 decades who was not a lawyer. And the Wall Street Journal said I was quite possibly the poorest person to ever run. I thought that was a flex to the middle class because I know where they're at.
But,
but it didn't work. So what I would say is we did not send a message that people say they believe in those policies, but they didn't believe them in enough to go to the polls and cast that vote.
But the way you're putting it out right now, what I'm hearing is we had the right policies, but it was a communications problem. Where I think there's also something else going on, which is a fundamental lack of trust within, first of all, the Democratic Party as an institution that for many has become undemocratic by not putting out a primary, or voters have the feeling that you've lost where they are at. So there's something that's about trust in the Democratic Party. And one last example is keeping Biden in place for such a long time, where a lot of people thought, we love you, but it's over. And their thinking is, if we cannot trust the party on making the right decision there, why should we trust you? So can you address that issue?
Well, I think on a presidential level, presidential elections are different than any other elections. We won governor's races in 2022. We won state house races back. We won seats in Congress, even though our president was in. So this idea that whole across the entire board our policies aren't working, that's simply not factually correct. But for many of us know this is, it doesn't do you a lot of good to win a school board race if you lose the presidency, because the things that are coming down crush on you. So look, I'm more than willing to have the soul searching of where we go. The decisions about President Biden, I can't speak to that. I do think 90 days was probably not enough, but that was our own. That was our choice. We got there to that. So there's things to be done, but at the end of the day, how people could, and I guarantee if you went and polled Americans right now, the vast majority wouldn't have said we should side with Russia and throw Europe under the bus, but that's what we've got. That they were voting on other things. Was it the price of eggs? Was it the price of gas? Was it social issues like abortion or transgender rights? I do know this was a mistake. In a 90-day campaign, I myself got sucked into talking about them eating the fake lie about eating dogs and cats, but they had us talking about immigration in a spin cycle that we couldn't get out of. And the public says they're concerned about immigration, even though we were offering a solution, it didn't appear like it. So I will tell you, we have got work to do. I am in no way, they said your policies aren't right. I'm not going to demonize immigrants. I'm not going to restrict reproductive rights. I'm not going to shrink us back in to a, America first isolationism. Those aren't super popular items, but they won the election implementing those things. So.
And I want to talk about the lessons that you've learned from the campaign and how you implement them into the time where we're now in the role that you have now. Yeah. But there's something else when we talk about trust, and that's about what politics in the US and the democratic political system have become. Because you've mentioned it before in other interviews, there's a huge lack of trust in the American political system for many reasons. And you operate as a politician within that system. Yeah. How do you navigate that, and how do you win back trust in a time that is so essential, especially because Donald Trump seems to eat off that lack of confidence in the old institutions?
Yeah, the irony with these guys is that the Republicans tell you that government doesn't work, then they get elected and prove it that it doesn't work. And it is a self-fulfilling prophecy that I heard his Secretary of Homeland Security complaining about people don't trust government, and they said, but you're the government. And the person was stunned. Of course they are. So this has been decades in the making, and I will make the case to you. It started with Ronald Reagan talking about, the worst things you can hear, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Well, that's nonsense, because when there's a hurricane, you damn sure want the government there. But we have not made the case well enough, and to be very honest, we've got ourselves caught on the fringe social issue that I was trying to simplify that in my message, because all of the issues around transgender rights and reproductive rights that we're not going to bend on, I always thought the most powerful message on that is just mind your own business. You don't want government in your bedroom, you don't want them. That felt to me like a very libertarian Republican position, and I think that works to a certain degree. But in America right now, the balkanization of the media, and I'll just be quite honest with you, the inability to discern that information, the isolation that we put ourselves in of not thinking as global. I'm a global geography teacher, so I'm biased in this, that a better understanding of the world. If you ask an American how much we spend on foreign aid, they will tell you half the budget, instead of 0.1% that we get back. If I asked a Minnesotan even who's our #1 trading partner, many would not say Canada, which it is. And so I would argue that we have to spend the time to meet voters where they're at, to recognize how they're getting information, and to make it clear. And in all fairness on this is a critique to me, is that was kind of my job because I'm a teacher, and that's what I'm supposed to do.
And a politician.
And I didn't do it. And a politician. And we didn't get just enough. Now,
wait, before you go any further, because I do want to get in a lot of questions here, it's sort of like the whole lack of trust within the political system eats into where we are right now. You have a job to do, Donald Trump is doing his job, and it taps into a question from the audience from Jonathan, who said, well, I'm paraphrasing here, but let's say there's a Walz 2028. Will that be a free and fair election in the US?
Yes, and I still do believe in this. Do I think it will be as broadly participated in? No. I worry about Republican governors restricting the ability to vote, voter ID things, some of these things, that will be more difficult. This is, again, I think this is the original sin of the Trump administration, and Donald Trump was, the election denial has been so corrosive. Couple that with a global pandemic and the response around COVID, and you opened it up to conspiracy theories, you opened it up to distrust, you opened it up to people not being able to discern what was real from what's not. And that, while you don't have to change ballots and you don't have to do anything that's nefarious or against the law, to still have a very suppressive effect on the election. And yes, I worry about it.
So just to get it straight, because there's also constitutional scholars in the House, there's a lot of fear going around that Donald Trump will have eaten at the democratic institution up until such a level that there is no democratic elections possible anymore. And you're saying no fear, it's going to be fine.
I'm not saying no fear, I'm afraid. So
okay,
I
just
think
to get
I'm not
it straight.
saying no fear, But I'm saying there's antidotes to it. There's pushback. Look, I think in America we still keep thinking this charismatic leader is going to rise out of the ashes and lead us out of this. Nobody's coming to save us, people. It's us. And we're going to have to believe that if those democratic institutions matter enough, if the courts can hold, which they need to, what happens when they deny the courts? What is going to be the response there? All of those things are going to be critically important. But I do ask you this. There is a shelf life on this administration. I'm not asking you to buckle down. Somebody's like, oh, it's going to be a long 4 years. It was a long 4 weeks. I'm not saying that that's it, but what I can tell you is very quickly there are going to be gates that he's going to have to cross through. He's going to have to get a budget. He's going to have to raise the debt ceiling. And then we're going to get into this November, and this is just me for you, whatever it's worth. The governor election in Virginia will tell you where we're at.
Okay, and before we're going to go pundit and like race projecting, what's the one big lesson that you learned from the campaign that you use in this time and age of resistance that you can do? What's the big lesson for you?
You shouldn't bank political power to win the next election. You should burn political power to improve people's lives. And in Minnesota, the reason that I think we still continue to win is we leaned into our values. We had a 1-seat majority, and we passed paid family medical leave. We expanded access to abortion services. We made Minnesota a trans refuge state. We moved to 2040 carbon-free energy. We moved Minnesota in a progressive way that improved people's lives. And lo and behold, when you do things that people like and improves their lives, they're more apt to vote for you again. Because I've got a whole bunch of Democrats saying this. When Obama got elected, he had a 70% approval rating, much higher than Trump's. He had the House and he had the Senate, and we didn't get anything done. So what I'm telling them is, when we win these elections and we get it back, we're going to burn our political power to get universal health care. We're going to do all of this. And I think you have to inspire people to why it matters. What I've learned is Democrats have been very cautious, and I think some of that is because we respect the institutions. I'm not asking us to do what Trump's doing, be unconstitutional, but I'm asking us to lean further into the things that we believe in to show the results. Because I think you said this about the trust in the Democratic Party. I think there were a whole lot of people said, we elected you guys and it didn't feel like much changed. And it's the same. And that depressed their vote. They didn't vote for Trump, they stayed home.
Yeah, and this time around, a lot of people are saying, where are the Democrats? Because you're talking about resistance.
Amsterdam.
I've answered. Well, I mean, you've been vocal over the last couple of weeks when it came to freezing funds that Donald Trump did, and you are associated with your fellow Democratic, at least Midwestern governors. But so many people, not just here, but out in the US, are like, where are the Democrats? Come on, go out blazing. What's happening?
Well, I think they're there. I do think there is a tendency to us be rule followers, to be out, to say, look, we're in the minority or whatever. I do think it's a mistake. I saw Bernie Sanders is going on the road. He's going to be in Omaha. He's going to try and rally some people up. I did mention to, looking for this charismatic leader and being out there. And I talked to President Obama here a week or so ago, and he said, I went in with 70% approval rating. I had the House. I had the Senate. There wasn't a charismatic opposition to me. There was Mitch McConnell and John Boehner. And they, right? And they successfully blocked and wore me down. I do think the fear of this is, remember when Democrats had the votes necessary, but we insisted on keeping the filibuster in the Senate for that? I guarantee you Donald Trump's not going to insist on the filibuster. He's not going to ask for 60 votes. And I think this idea that somebody's going to step up, folks are out there. The resistance, this isn't the Women's March. The Women's March not out there in the millions of people. And look, black women said, we got the assignment, we did our job. Where the hell was everybody else on going this?
But
so
I'm not talking about, so sorry to interrupt you, Governor, I'm not talking about citizens. They're tired, and I get it. They did it.
No, I'm saying that
I'm talking about politicians. I'm talking about you and all the Democrats.
Yes.
There's a need.
And I'm trying, yes, I hear you on this. One thing we don't have, and I am somewhat envious of this, Europeans with a parliamentary system, it is a much better fit and works for you to have the shadow government and to have the resistance. I've been advocating this in America. Every time they do a press conference, we should do a press conference. Every time the Secretary of Transportation talks about why our damn planes are wrecking all the time, Pete Buttigieg will be out there talking about why they didn't crash when he was in charge. And we start making... There's no mechanism for that right now. And quite honestly, I was just candidly, you saw it played out in public. We had a conversation between some governors and Senate leadership, and then someone leaked what happened in there, and then someone got their feelings hurt, and things just went to crap. And then all of a sudden you have Democrats looking like in disarray, when there is just not a natural mechanism for us to be making the case. And I think what Donald Trump understood was he got beat in that election, then he said he didn't, but for 4 stinking years, the press found the need to cover him of whatever he said, and it stymied some of the movement. So I think it's a fair critique. I will tell you, I don't know what that mechanism actually looks like, but I think...
What does it look like for you? Because you're a
looks
governor,
like a
you
shadow
have power,
government.
you have money.
Yeah, it looks like coming to Europe and rallying our allies who think the same. I think it looks like gathering speakers to come. I think like inviting folks from Parliament in the Netherlands to come visit Minnesota, which we did this morning. I think it looks like singing globally that we're all in this together and trying to unify a little more about what we're up against. And I have no official authority to do that. I have the platform of having my 90-day Eras tour this fall or whatever. But it mattered to take that out there and then to use it as governor to promote trade, to promote civil society, to promote cultural. And that's, again, I'm just going to tell you, you're seeing it in real time. No one knows the answer right now, and we're trying to figure it out. But I am still convinced about this. Our ideas are better. The vast majority of people want to choose the morally right road, and most of us globally are very fearful of a totalitarian U.S. government that is not there to promote world peace, but is there to upset the balance. And so I think there's a strong desire to fix that. So that's the moment we're in.
Yeah, and also within a party there are a lot of opinions about, they're flooding the zone with shit. Are we fighting everything? Are we fighting one thing? Where are you on that scale?
Yeah, I'm not if I had my own way and I had like the key to my own Twitter account, tell my team, so I could go crazy every day, everything they do, I would lose my mind, because I do think a lot of this is just flood the zone for distraction. I think the real threats are the undermining the rule of law, the stuff that, I don't know what his official title is, part-time President Musk, whatever he does, whatever that guy does, that stuff is really dangerous. And that speech in Munich last week is way more dangerous than that they're going to take away plastic straws. And Donald Trump is getting rid of low flush toilets because they don't flush well enough. They don't care about anything that has conservation. I think we get stuck. I don't think you have to ignore things. I certainly don't think we should ignore things that demonize our most vulnerable citizens. But I think we should have a more focused effort on where we're going to draw the line, where we're going to stand. And I think my test on this always is could you just imagine if a Democratic president was doing the things they're doing? I guarantee you they would have fire and they would be out there doing something. We should probably take a bit of a lesson from them in the disruption, obstruction phase of this that we're not doing.
What would that lesson look like?
Look, it's taking them to court. We have the ability. Look, he's turning back on climate change. We're full forward in there. That's why we're here. We're just down with Nesty. We're pioneering along with what you're doing here in the Netherlands on sustainable aviation fuel. We're pioneering our hydrogen hub to take carbon out of fertilizer in our agricultural business. We're making the case for people to improve their lives and showing them results that shows them things can get done. And look, people want to see things. They don't want to hear you talk about it. We just today announced the licenses are going to go out. We legalized adult use cannabis. That's going to get a lot of votes, and it is, because they're seeing it get done. They see something on that. I think that's what we're doing. I'm leaning into the things that improve people's lives and making the case. Every time he does something that pulls away one of your rights, it makes it harder for you. Like, he's not supportive of the child tax credit. That thing's super popular. Credits for child care so that people can work. We have to give an alternate universe that isn't just in speeches, that it's really happening to people's lives. Then it becomes more difficult to pull those things away.
Where do you think you can be more effective resisting this administration, as a governor or as a senator? Because there's rumors going around. You might be interested in that.
We have an open Senate seat. I used to say this when people said, I was in the House of Representatives for 12 years, and they're like, do you miss it? I said, I would rather eat glass than, than go to there. Governors are highly effective, but it is a good question now in that I think we're seeing the federal resistance and the lack thereof of Democrats is what's bothering people, and trying to anticipate that. I'll serve where I'm asked to. Minnesota does not have term limits on their governors. I've served 2 terms. I did say this, though, the other day, and they asked, oh, the governor's thinking about a 3rd term. I said, yes. I could finish this term and 4 more and still be younger than Donald Trump is today. So, who knows?
So, let's say you would go back to Washington, D.C. What would you bring from your local experience?
I think it's trusting the governors and building that partnership. You heard me talk about that there's power, and I think a path out of this thing is for our allies to work with sub-federal levels of government. There is a lot less collaboration than you would think there would be between our federal partners, even inside our own parties, and to the governor's level at states. Governors as executives, the ability to influence, and I served and was very proud, and I was a ranking member on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, Transportation Armed Services, but I think in one day as governor, I make more consequential decisions than I did in 12 years as a member of Congress. So for me, I think it's at the state level, but I think we have to figure out, we either have to win the Senate or the House in the 2026 midterms, or then it's really time to panic. Because I'm not asking you, I think this Virginia election will matter, but those midterms are going to be really important. So all I care about is whoever we run in Minnesota needs to win.
Yeah. There's an interesting sort of movement going on where both from the Republican side as from the Democratic side, as you're posing it right now, more power to the states, or more execution of the power that the states have versus the federal. Is that, it also means that more power to the states means less of a union. Is that the price to pay at this moment in time?
Yeah, maybe. The Republicans are interesting about this because I say interesting in a Minnesota way, you know, that they're interesting in this, that they want states' rights until they get federal power. Then they don't want states' rights. Yes, I do worry about this. Here's why I worry about it. If a woman's life is dependent on the zip code she lives in the United States, meaning she can't get access to life-saving reproductive or abortion care because she lives in a state, and that's happened time and time again, that is horrific. And I think our strength has been 50 United States. We've never been the same. Trump has clearly made the wedge. We're not just the loyal opposition or have people with wacky ideas. We are the enemies of the state. And you heard those chilling words in Munich that don't worry about the Russians or the Chinese, it's the enemy within. And that's you. I mean, that's who they're talking about.
Why do you think that expose of exporting those super conservative values happened this week?
Why do I think they happened?
Yeah.
Well, they're looking at their German elections, I think, so some of that. And I think these are who these people are. I worry that this is not just a super conservatism. The undertone of this is a Christian nationalism movement and some of the things that are pretty bad witches brew. And I think they see this as a more global movement. And I used to say this, I'm like, man, how did Italy elect Berlusconi and Marie Le Pen and, Nigel Farage, what's wrong with those people? And then I'm looking, oh my God, what's wrong with us? What happened? This movement is not just confined to us, as you well know. And I always said, well, Europe will at least have their, we always looked at this. Canada's like normal America is the way we look at it. Like they're not going to make the mistake. Canada's facing it. So this is global in it's a global movement. And I think they see themselves, quite honestly, putting those values out there.
So shouldn't the progressive movement be a more global movement then?
Oh, absolutely. And again, as I would say this, if you ask people, would you like health care or not? What a surprise. They'll say yes. Would you like to be left alone in your own decisions? Or would you like us to make every decision for you? Most people would say yes. We just have to, whatever reason, I don't know if we're bad communicators, if we're bad teachers, because we're not putting things in there. This isn't a progressive idea for progressive ideas. There are things that just actually work. There are things that make a difference in people's lives, and we have the data to support it. We have got an outbreak of measles and tuberculosis in America right now. And we just confirmed a guy who apparently thinks that's a good thing. Yeah. That's America. That's where we're at. Yeah. So that was the encouragement today that I heard from people. I think we have to think, we certainly can't think, and Americans have had the luxury of being able to do this, like what happens across the water doesn't impact us as much. It's like sleeping next to an elephant. When that speech happened and when they met in Riyadh, your lives are all impacted like that. We have to see ourselves tied together in this if we're truly going to make a difference. And I'm telling you, the most vulnerable amongst us who aren't here and don't know any of us, but depend on the work we do to provide a free clinic in Colombia or in sub-Saharan Africa, we're going to have to be there because our soft power is what helped bring a little more stability, and we're giving up on our soft power.
We're ready for the, unfortunately, last question on domestic issues, and it's one from the audience, from Filippo, who is, I'm paraphrasing here. The US has a masculinity issue, we could say, or another way to put it is masculinity and femininity have been a very divisive element also in the campaign, and they are influencing elections also in Germany right now. It was part of also your pitch, or what people made your pitch. This is what a man can be like.
You're asking me to defend manhood here. Is that
well, I mean, you're a white male of middle age. There's not much worse you can be at this moment in time, so, No, I'm asking you, this is not going away.
No.
It's gone worse. And my question to you is, or Filippo's question, paraphrased by me, is how do you navigate that now? And what have you learned? How do you counter it?
Yeah. And look, young men, and that's a tough age. I've got an 18-year-old going to, I was mentioning, I don't think I said it backstage, I was saying I was having one of those dad talks explaining things to my son so he would get it. And in the middle of that debate, he said, says the guy who lost to Donald Trump. And I'm like, touche. But my son came home and wanted to debate minimum wage with me because he heard it with Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan was talking about that. So an understanding that he was hearing that, I think there is a crisis amongst young men of where they're at, trying to figure that out. I never looked at myself, I'm not like, oh, look at me, I was a teacher, a football coach. I always wanted to be, my thing to be that I was a good teacher. Good teachers are good coaches. I did that. That wasn't my identity. I was in the military. It wasn't my identity. Just things that I did. But what I did notice was that must have worried them because they attacked those things. Because in Congress, we would have a trap shoot every year, 25 sporting clay, 25 skeet, 25 trap. And I would beat the hell out of all of them. I could outshoot them. And then I'd ride back on the bus and say, how does it feel to be beat by a liberal gun grabber in gun? But that was just part of it. And the idea is kind of a permission structure for white men who like to watch football and work on their own trucks to vote. And they got so nervous about that, they keyed up on one policy that we put into place because they love the alliteration, it was Tampon Tim thing. We passed a law in Minnesota that we would put feminine hygiene products in our bathrooms for our young women. Wow, imagine that. So, just like the idea that we put toilet paper in there, we would do this. They just found that the most horrific thing. and they keyed in on it, and the young men, and it seemed very juvenile, but you're exactly right. This idea and definition of masculinity, it was a hop, skip, and a jump over to demonizing the trans community. And this weekend, a Minnesotan, Sam Norquist, was brutally tortured and murdered in New York. I got to be honest with you. That was because of the rhetoric that's out there that leads to this, and it's very dangerous.
But Governor...
And so here's what I say is, I got to start lifting more weights. I got to start doing, be more manly in this. I think the issue is, and it comes back to this, misogyny is running very strong right now. The abortion issue and the wins we saw, and in many communities, we've seen women higher attainment and education moving up in areas where they could, and you're feeling like that white men feeling left behind. And there's a movement in that to push back. Look, we've got states that are making laws on no-fault divorce.
Sorry to interrupt you, Governor, but we're also short in time. How do you fight that is the question. What's your answer to that growing concern with...
Be a decent human being and be a good role model for these kids and just continue to show them what it looks like.
Yeah. Well,
and lift more weights.
How many push-ups can you do? Yeah. Governor, we're going to put the domestics to rest. Thank you so much.
We got a minute?
No, we're... Yeah, he's coming out. I think we can come out. Yeah.
Thank you, Lila. Thank you, Governor Walz. I am heartened by the audience reactions tonight. It's good to hear that hope is alive in Amsterdam. Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Kenny. I'm the Program and Development Coordinator here at the John Adams Institute, and I have the honor of telling you more about what we're doing at the John Adams, our upcoming programming, and how you can and already do support us. In other words, I am the only thing between you and hearing more from Governor Walz. But don't worry, I promise it's only for a few moments, and that we are very grateful for your attention. As Tracy mentioned earlier, it has never been more important to support the John Adams. In these turbulent times that we find ourselves in, it is sponsorship and our community that keep us going. Our independence does come at a price. Our mission is to welcome the best and the brightest of American thinking for public events right here in Amsterdam, to give you all a window onto the American experience and maybe even some insight into what is happening an ocean away and how that impacts our lives right here. I think we all felt that this weekend. Our team is busy quite literally day and night putting together a program to help you make sense of the world around you, and yes, that includes also when things sometimes seem beyond comprehension. But that work is only possible thanks to our community and to our sponsors. Every level of support, from buying a ticket to one-off events or purchasing a yearly membership, from our young professionals, our associates, to our friends and family, and of course, our corporate sponsors, your donation makes our work possible. So put simply, without you, we wouldn't be here tonight with Governor Walz, and we wouldn't have been able to welcome Timothy Snyder weeks ago, Terrence Hayes last summer, Walter Isaacson the year before, or Jill Lepore as well. So please, consider joining us for the long haul, and trust me, it will feel long sometimes. But together, I know that we can continue our mission. So I would like to extend a very special thanks on behalf of the Institute's team and our board to everyone in the audience who is already contributing. We're so grateful for your support, and we are thrilled to have you here tonight. And I would also like to extend an invitation to anyone in the audience who doesn't yet support us structurally. Should you feel moved, please do so. You can find out how to join us on one of the QR codes above. Now, as you know, the John Adams Institute is a very busy place, and our next speaker coming up in just a couple weeks' time is none other than legal expert and author Kim Whaley. Kim is the author of books on the Constitution, the importance of exercising our right to vote, and she is joining us as our first ever thinker in residence here this winter. Kim is teaching a winter course, the first edition of which starts this Thursday already, and she just arrived yesterday in the Netherlands, and will be our guest of honor at our upcoming event on March 13th on the topic Pardon, Power, Reforming the Sword of Justice. And she's here tonight. Kim, would you stand up, please, and give everyone a wave? We're very honored that we could help host you in Amsterdam. And for those of you who may be a little less dialed in, Kim is a frequent guest in American media on pretty much everything from presidential pardons to the Supreme Court, and we'll be delving into this contentious and much discussed executive power. When we were talking with Kim a few weeks ago, she said, "I've never been busier." So we're glad to have her in Amsterdam with us. The timing for the event really couldn't be better or worse, depending on how you look at it. And I wish I could say we planned it that way. We did to a certain extent, but things have just taken their course. So if you are curious to come out, please get your phones out right now. Get them out. I know you all have them on you. Scan the QR code on the screen above me and buy a ticket to join us for the event. I won't mind seeing screens glowing on faces as I finish up. But before I hand it back to Governor Walz and Director of the Netherlands Atlantic Association, Anne van Soest, I just want to reflect briefly on the political reality that we find ourselves in right now. It's maybe one of our institute's best or worst kept secrets that I am actually a Canadian citizen. And I must admit that as a Canadian, these are pretty unprecedented times for the relationship between my country of birth and the United States, where my grandmothers hailed from. There's been a lot of noise recently, mostly and most concerningly from the White House, about Canada becoming the 51st state. And while I'm no expert on the matters of state sovereignty, I did want to let you all in on a little secret. That north of the border, us Canadians are so fond of Minnesotans that we actually extend them and Vermonters honorary citizenship long ago. So to Governor Walz and his entire team, to everyone in the audience from Minnesota tonight, please know that you will always have friends in the north. And with that, I would like to hand it back over to Governor Walz and the Director of the Netherlands Atlantic Association, Anne van Soest, for the second part of our interview, where in part one we stuck to the domestic side of things. We'll now turn to foreign affairs. Governor Walz, Anne, please join me on the stage and take it away.
Governor Walz.
I'm insecure in my masculinity now when I came back out.
We're going to look at the rest of the world, so there's quite a lot to talk about. And Governor Walz, you are at heart a social geography teacher. And I've been wondering, looking at what came out of Brussels, out of Munich, out of Paris, out of Riyadh today, how would you explain this to a class of 25, 15-year-olds?
Yeah, well, I would not be prepared to do that because my training was in a world order that is post-World War II, that valued the Western democracies. The America First movement is, while sounding nationalistic and patriotic, is the antithesis of that, of saying that we didn't do this together, we didn't fight side by side against totalitarianism. And I think what I would do to tell them is, I would first back up and talk to them about the history, which I will accept responsibility is, Americans' ability to see that history and to see us tied in what happened. We have this grand vision that we swooped into Normandy and that was all that happened during the war after we won, not recognizing the resistance that was there, the things that were happening, and how we worked as allies. It shocked my students always when I talked to them. When I taught in China, there were pictures in the classroom. They had Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong, and there was an American general, Joe Stilwell, who worked with the Americans when the Chinese, you tell them this, fought with us against the Japanese during World War II. So I think America gets itself in this situation because I don't think we've done a good enough job of understanding our interconnected history, and I would start with that. And then I would talk about what is the ultimate goal here. what is the realignment here. The idea that we are going to reward Russia at the negotiating table for an invasion of a sovereign nation, part of Europe, with demands, when the Secretary of Defense of the United States says they're not getting their land back and they're not going into NATO, not a whole lot of people fell out of their chair in America. I think in Europe you probably did, because you understood what those words meant. And so I think what I would say is, and I think we need to think about this, we have to do a better job of telling our story and telling interconnectedness. And I say we, all of you in Europe, if this is it, because you've got some decisions to make. I mean, are you going to go into debt and rearm? That is one possible path. Are you going to not believe you've got a
So we'll get to that.
partner?
We'll get to
All right.
what we need to
No,
do.
I would teach the history.
Yeah.
I would teach the history. I think we got ourselves into this situation because we did not see ourselves as interconnected partners in a world that was defending common values, and we got ourselves into this position of saying nothing else matters us first. What's really interesting, this is coming home to roost, USAID being cut, the people paying the highest price, certainly the folks out there who are at AIDS clinics and HIV clinics and things like that, but it's American farmers now who are like, where's my payment? Where's my payment for the food?
So, Governor Walz, had it been you in Munich last week, what would you have done differently?
This is a cruel question. So I would have fallen back on our insistence that we get to the negotiating table. I would have asked us and asked Americans to continue to put the sanctions necessary on this and to have a return to the original borders. And again, the Vice President is taking, I think, Vice President Harris made it clear on this. She was never wavering. We would have supported our NATO allies in the defense of Ukraine and strengthened our relationships and understood where some of those tensions were. And we, point blank, I mean, nothing that happened in Riyadh is going to change this. Minnesotans stand with Ukraine. We signed a memorandum of understanding with them to help them rebuild their agricultural sector with help from our agricultural sector after this. Those are conservative farmers in Minnesota who recognize that. So I think we would have taken this and held to our values and brought this thing. Look, they may end this war, but it won't be a just ending, and it won't be a final ending if aggression is rewarded and Europe is weakened. And so I think it would have been very different.
So you spoke about rearmament just now, and it's interesting because we always talk about defense spending, which is maybe a bit of a euphemism, because of course it is also about rearmament. And this is not a new message from the US government. We've heard it over the years that Europe really needs to step up to the game and do more to be able to take responsibility for its own security. But we've also been a little bit slow in picking up on that front, and maybe have believed naively that the US would always come to our rescue. And now, of course, there's panic. And you said you've spoken to Parliament earlier today, so I'm very curious what you told him, but also maybe your advice to the 6 European leaders in the Élysée, Paris yesterday. What advice would you have for them?
Well, I don't pretend to speak for them, and they have the responsibility of security of all of you. Look, I'm not speaking for Vice President Harris. I'm speaking for what I've always seen this. I have actually fallen into the camp where I did not see this, that we need to force Europe to up their defense spending in this. Now, certainly a benefit for America in many cases, because we ask you to up your defense spending and you pay it to us for our weapons to give to you. So there's a bit of a selfish benefit in that. And it's not as if America wasn't arming anyway with this. And my Minnesota National Guard troops that I'm the commander-in-chief of are training right now in Norway in missions. I have trained alongside Dutch soldiers in Norway in missions up in Tromsø. Those were hugely beneficial. And I never saw it as a tit-for-tat on a ledger sheet. I saw the strengths that each of us had, the things we brought to it, and I viewed it as more holistic. That might have been a simple thing, but I saw it in action. And in the scope of the U.S. government budget and defense budget, asking the Netherlands to up a certain percentage of this is actually relatively small impact on that whole thing. So I never really understood that argument. What I'm saying to you now is, if you were and should have been a trusted partner, you didn't need to build new aircraft carriers because the United States had them and they were going to be there as part of NATO. What are you going to do now if they're not there? That's the question I'm asking, and I don't know if those leaders will decide that. And I think a critique out of America, an America that believed in this and thought there should have been some changes is, I was looking for something to come out other than a selfie out of Paris from the European leaders. And I know that, look, we're causing some of this. I get that. We're part of it. But there was no decision really made, or there was no decisive thing. I can tell you what encouraged the opposition, if we're the opposition in America, when Canada didn't take any crap and pulled all the Tennessee whiskey off the shelves and said, to hell with you guys. They did. Canada, they're like us. We walk on water half the damn year. These are tough people. They are tough. They're used to it being cold. They're used to this. And we underestimated that. I have to tell you, I was hoping for a strong statement of unity to come out of that it would have encouraged, and it didn't. So I don't quite, I don't want to speak for them. I'm certainly not speaking for Vice President Harris. I'm speaking of myself, who served on the Armed Services Committee, who've seen this, who've served alongside NATO troops. They've got a tough decision to make. If they don't believe we're going to be there, and if they're going to allow the land that Russia took, the calculus has definitely changed, more than it has in the last 80 years. So.
Any concrete suggestions on what Europe could do, what these leaders could have decided on Monday?
I think they could have insisted that Zelensky be at the table. I think they could have pushed the United States, and what that would do is, keep in mind, we're in a unique situation on this. Had they done that, I'm not being facetious when I say Canada and Mexico's resistance to tariffs and the attempted name to change the Gulf of Mexico, that pushback actually inspired folks to speak up a little more and to push back. And the whole renaming things, by the way, I don't want to get on a tangent, but the geographer in me just drives me insane. I am convinced Donald Trump would think the Chinese call themselves Chinese. They don't, He doesn't know. So. It's true. We're going to change the name of China. There you go.
You mentioned Anne Frank.
Yeah.
And you're in the city of Anne Frank. And it touched me, like I think it has touched many people in this room. And I think we have all derived a lot of strength and comfort from the shared history with the United States. And this has given the US and Europe a very strong foundation to build on. And it really seems like these values that we've embraced together, democracy, human rights, liberty, that they no longer resonate, at least not in the same way as we understood them. And I think this has been extremely painful to us. I think J.D. Vance's speech in Munich has been extremely painful to us. And you just talked about stories and the need for a different story. And I think the big question of today is how we can reach out and connect with a story that could unite us again. And I wondered if you could reflect on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, it is. It's troubling to me in many ways, and I think what you're seeing is this realignment. I see my values reflected in the Netherlands, maybe more so like in the state of Texas, where I have relatives and things. That is truly happening in front of us. And this issue of the atrocities, if you let this get out, I know it's a dangerous proposition, because whenever I say it, I'm sure, I was mentioning I referred to to Elon Musk's Musk salute. He is going to sue me now because I called him a fascist or whatever it was. It's not a fun and games thing on there, and we're flirting on the edge of things that are really dangerous. I mean, U.S. President yesterday saying anything in service to the state is not against the law. And you've heard that before. Anne Frank's family, Otto, had heard that before. And so I think for all of us, how we view our common humanity, how we talk about it, how we prepare for this. I just lost in this, the heroics of the Ukrainian people just kind of passing on the news once in a while. If you want to know about Ukraine, if you're in America, you got to watch BBC, or you don't see anything. And And we have a lot of Ukrainian heritage. So I would just appeal to all of us to again, you've done it, and I recognize Europe is much more global looking, but I'm encouraging Americans to see more of that, to see that commonality, because look, there's a cruelness. It's not a bug in this, it's a feature of these guys. It's always cruel. It's always, Elon Musk was on for $40 billion, he bought a website so that he could attack a blind person today on there. I mean, just this cruelness we've heard time and time again. Those words, I saw that the Auschwitz Foundation had to fact check J.D. Vance when he said that the Holocaust wasn't caused by anything to do with speech or free speech. And they said, well, actually it was, is where it started. So being in Anne Frank, and just a side note on this, some of my graduate work was in genocide studies, and watching that play itself out is troubling.
Yeah, I mean, from what we know, because this is, of course, an unfolding story, but is that Europe will have to deal with a government that's very transactional in its dealings, and that there will be deal-making, and that there will have to be profits, and that there will have to be quick results. I think that's the impression we get. Now, what I'm curious about is the exchanges that will take place. And we've heard about increasing imports of liquid natural gas from the United States. There's been talks about natural resources. There's talks about the regulation or lack thereof of big tech. I mean, what do you think Europe will be able to offer in this more transactional way of dealing with the United States?
Well, look, your powerful economy together, we recognize that. It's not as if we're going to pivot to Russia's. California's economy is way bigger than Russia's. We understand that. European Union has a force that can be recognized. They are going to be transactional. But I will tell you this, when Premier Ford in Ontario threatened energy needs and things like that, they got some results. Just to be clear, a lot of this is boisterous talk that he ended up not following through with because of the pain that will come with it. I think you need to be prepared to drive a hard bargain on this, but I will just say this, and I don't like that this happens, but this is where we're at. Canada was really smart about this because they said, we're going to retaliate, and we're going to put tariffs on, and we're going to stop products, but only from those states that voted for Donald Trump. They said it. They did it. And man, you could just hear puffed up, like we're in Minnesota, like, yeah, damn right. And that's good. But the idea is a recognition, and this is what I hope you don't do. I still contend that it is the official American position, and I respect that they have been articulating. It's not the majority position of Americans. And in that, I think, lies the strength. And again, the questions that came earlier, we weren't able to inspire them to come out and vote, and I own that. But I think there's a lot of people now won't make that mistake again. And that's what we're focusing on. How are we engaging them?
And maybe back to this exchange, and I think we will have to recognize that in the area of security and within NATO, there is a certain dependence on the United States. And I think you've spoken very wisely about the need for Europe to show resolve and to really enter into this conversation from a position of strength. But that will need more from us, and I imagine there will be some tough asks also from Washington towards Europe. And maybe to talk a little bit about China and also your personal views and experience. I mean, we see a government in Washington that wants to take a stance, that talks about upping tariffs, 60%, we've heard. What is the right way to deal with China? And also, how should Europe sort of maneuver in this triangle of relationships?
Yeah, here's a weird little factoid for you. After the United States changed under the Clinton administration most favored nation status, they set up a joint House-Senate Select Committee, the China Commission, that was there to be the keepers and monitors of China's human rights record, because we no longer had trade as a leverage to make sure China kept their promises on human rights. When I was in Congress, I was a co-chair of that with current Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And there was a weird dynamic on that there were, you would get the dragon slayers and the panda huggers. My experience on this as a young man, I taught there. I said I'd been to China. I better count the exact number because CBS will fact check me. 15, where's my team? 15 times living there. Look, those of you who are familiar with China, I said I went 15 times. I was about one trip from knowing nothing about China because I learned less when I went. But I was been there since the 80s. And a recognition that China was going to become a superpower and that these pressing issues like climate change and global security, we are going to have to engage China in a meaningful way. The Chinese are facing many of the same problems we have: an aging population, climate change is impacting them. They need to solve these things. And in 2015, I was in Beijing with Nancy Pelosi at Beijing University, and we were talking joint efforts around climate change. I think the Trump administration moves like pulling back USAID opens up that void that China will fill, and they've been fulfilling in sub-Saharan Africa. But I do think there is the potential to engage them in a meaningful way to try and solve some of these problems. Now, does the Trump administration have that? They have ginned up anti-Chinese hate. They ginned it up, apparently in 1989, the Chinese apparently recruited a teacher from Nebraska as a Manchurian candidate who would run in 2024 as a friend of China. And they ginned this stuff up amongst their members that this became like a real thing for them. You would have thought that having a vice presidential candidate who had a lot of experience with China would have been seen as a positive. They don't see it that way. But here's my take on this is, if Donald Trump thinks he can benefit from this and there's a transactional discussion, I think he'll deal with Xi Jinping, and I worry about that might not be in the best interest of the security of our allies, whether it's Japan, South Korea, Australia, and others. So my take on this is we should deal with them diplomatically as we always have, but we have to find a middle ground where this heated confrontation and this arms race, especially in the Pacific, that we find some type of détente and we work for some of that common good, because China's going to find it much more difficult to rule their folks as they see that aging population. Their banking crisis is coming, and there's some options there. But will Donald Trump do that? Depends what's in it for him. So
the Netherlands is home to a number of companies in the high-tech segment in the semicon industry. And you've spent a day in Eindhoven. I mean, you've seen some of this. If
the Brainport, what they're doing, it's amazing.
But if the pressure were to rise on Europe and the Netherlands to follow the US on higher trade restrictions towards China, how can we balance this, given the fact that we are so dependent on the US on the security front?
It's a great question. My answer and my fear is you turn towards China away from the United States. You turn towards China and you create deals with them. They may be seen as a more dependable partner. They're not going to be as erratic because their 5-year plans, they execute them. They've been doing it for 80 years. They'll carry that out. This is my fear. Not the fear that America needs to be the global leader, the rise of China and India, and there's going to be some of that, but at least be the voice for those things we care about, those values we share. But I feel you're going to be put in a vice on some of this, and certainly countries like Colombia and others, if we're going to randomly pressure them to take immigrants or slap tariffs on them, I think they turn towards China. And the problem is who could blame them? If that means aid, if that means technology, if that means trade, they're going to do that. So I think Europe's got some decisions. I'm here to try and tell you that this partnership and this friendship and these cooperations matter deeply. Our economic ties are tight. Our innovation is there. Just with the Philips folks who are going to invest in Plymouth, Minnesota to build medical devices to work with their imaging. Those are partnerships that really matter. They create jobs, they create wealth, and the bottom line is they improve lives. And so that's the reason for us being here. That's one of the things that we're able to do. And I think, yes, the federal level can cause some issues. But in the example of Philips they're not worried about tariffs on their products if they're making them in Plymouth, Minnesota. So that's my selling point. It's like Shark Tank. I'm selling you on Minnesota, so come. So
we'll get to that later on as well.
That was a domestic pitch. Sorry, we moved on.
The Middle East. And I can assure you that you are sitting in front of an audience that is extremely engaged and extremely concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. And we've all followed the vision of President Trump for the future of Gaza. Your comments on that, but maybe also, is there any hope to find in all of this?
Well, for many of us, this has been a vexing problem for most of our adult lives. I have been unabashedly a supporter of a two-state solution. I was very careful in China, when I was in Congress, when I traveled to Israel, many members of Congress, almost all, traveled through the AIPAC-sponsored trip, and I did not do that to be seen as a fair actor, to not be seen from the Palestinian perspective of picking sides in this. Now, Israel's an ally of the United States. That has been the case, but finding a two-state solution with self-determination and sovereignty for the Palestinian people was always critical. Look, the pain of the presidential campaign, it's no secret to all of you. Palestinian community in Wisconsin, in Michigan, felt that there was no difference between Vice President Harris and myself and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And again, this is a failure. Apparently, we didn't convince enough of them to come vote that there was a difference. Now, with this proposal, again, I don't know about all of you. When he said it, I was stunned, but I should learn. I've done this before. I was stunned in what he said, and then 2 days later, he's standing next to Bibi Netanyahu, and he's saying it again, and he's backing him up on it. And I'm not hearing a lot from the Arab world at this point in time. And we have a situation that we're still getting the hostages returned, the horrificness of this conflict starting in August or in October, and all of the casualties across the board needed to end. But how can there be lasting peace if the goal here is Trump Gaza's plaza or whatever it's going to be? I am just baffled by this. And more than anything, I'm baffled by the silence. Baffled by the silence back at home, baffled by the silence I'm hearing across Europe, and not quite certain where it goes. This guy can break the mold. He is a disruptor. Maybe I was too tied into this idea that there could be a possibility of a two-state solution with Israel's security being guaranteed and Gaza's sovereignty being guaranteed, and we move forward. Maybe that wasn't possible. And I always have to entertain the idea, what if he's right? It certainly doesn't seem that way to me, but that's the situation we're in right now. So.
You spoke about soft power earlier on, and I'm just wondering, given the criticism of US policy in the Middle East, maybe the West's policy in the Middle East, what kind of credibility do we have left? And I'm thinking of the voting that took place in the UN General Assembly on Ukraine, and the fact that we realized that we might not have had as many friends as we thought we had. In this world where there is new regional powers upcoming that do not necessarily want to connect themselves to the United States or to Europe, how do we maintain a sense of credibility together?
Yeah, I think first of all, this is my understanding for what it's worth. I don't believe this administration values soft power. I don't believe Donald Trump understands soft power. I don't think there is an overarching theme that soft power creates increased living standards. If it's not enough for just the decency of humanity to help, it provides stability in these countries, which, if done the right way, could reduce migration, which would eliminate your immigration problems that you apparently have, and would start to solve problems and open up markets and those types of things. They do not see it that way. They do not see the value in that. And I think maybe they see that the private sector can fill this, because after this latest plane crash, and I would tell you all but one person is out of the hospital and no one died, that left Minneapolis. Elon Musk tweeted that we need to get rid of all these government bureaucrats, and the SpaceX engineers will ensure that our planes are safe. My God, I mean, they're not even hiding the grift. They're just running it in front of us. So globally, I am worried about this because right now, can you trust the United States to be there? Well, Ukraine could answer that question better than I could. And what does that new world order look like? Again, I'm a product of the post-Cold War order, Marshall Plan onward. I believe it brought great stability. I think the risk of a lot of global chaos is very real, and who benefits from that? And I'm just, I don't know. We all learned many Americans finally understand what an oligarch is. Maybe there is no borders on this, and maybe that there is more of that the folks that are benefiting at the top of this, that chaos isn't necessarily a bad thing for them, and that's where we're at. So I don't have a solution to it, but I don't see any way that it's not a dangerous road we're headed down. I think the pullback of U.S. soft power and diplomacy is bad. A void will be filled. That void could be anarchy. That void could be China. I don't think it's Russia. They have the capability. I feel like I should say more about them. They banned me from travel there. I'm on their travel list. So I feel like I should just crap talk them all the time when I do it. So now I need to worry about the U.S. ban. That's the one. So
maybe to end this conversation on a more positive note, because you're here representing a delegation from Minnesota. So there is diplomacy going on, but on the state level. So maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm joined by Delta Airlines. I'm joined by the Mayo Clinic. I'm joined by Greater MSP. When we take our bigger trade missions, we have agriculture. We're a major producer of many agricultural products, and we're working on those things. We bring our universities, civil society, still trading and exchanging ideas. I would argue that in the midst of this, look, sometimes the disruptors of what we need, I will acknowledge that. I think we get fat and happy on certain things and unwilling to change on this. This might be the wake-up call to strengthen our ties, to bring that global movement around human rights, to tackle some of these things, to recognize the attack on women's rights has been going on. It's not just in Afghanistan, it's in Idaho, it's elsewhere. And to figure out if there is if you will, a new order that was not what we were existing with and thinking what it's fine. And I think that way of thinking, this came up to me thinking that globally, but domestically on this. Because I can tell you what, when we get back in power and we win these things, we tell them, what I'm telling my constituents is, we're not messing around with the ACA Obamacare. We're moving to universal health care because we're messing around with something that doesn't work well, and the insurance companies are still in charge. We compromised on our health care bill with Obama that got us in a situation that was better, but still not very good. And I think that's how we should view some of these global relationships and where some of the things we're at, that maybe we were satisfied with something that wasn't far enough, and maybe we need to be the ones to inspire them, because I do not believe these guys' foreign policy, or many things they're asking for, are very inspiring. They're based on fear in many cases. I taught fourth grade. Fear is a wonderful short-term motivator. It doesn't change behaviors and it doesn't inspire. Now, I may have tested that theory because I was talking about joyful campaigning and we got our ass kicked, but I still think there's something to that there is a innate human desire to try and find order and to try and find solutions for our kids, and these guys aren't going to give it. They're going to fail at those things because they're disregarding the core values. I think I saw, maybe it was the defense secretary or someone said, well, you can't shoot values, or some flippant comment that we're focused too much on our shared values. I think that's an opening to say that's bull crap. Our shared values are what bring us together, and it's what inspires people. So that's my hope. I say all this. I am a realist. I've seen this, but I'm also an eternal optimist. So, accomplished. So we'll get there.
That was great.
Fantastic. Well done.
That was great. Are they coming out? I got something for you.
That's very nice.
Yes.
Thank you for this. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. We stay. Yeah. We stay on the stage.
Thank you, Governor Walz, for your insights and for this thought-provoking evening. And thank you, Anna and Lila. A couple of the things that stuck with me. A lot of these things I recognize from my own thoughts, but I'd never been able to put them so eloquently as Governor Walz has done. Republicans tell you government doesn't work, then they get elected and they prove it. I'll keep a hold of that one for a long time. And there were some things that also didn't give me hope. I think although all of us here this evening are looking for hope as we move forward, Walz, like all of us, was hoping that a stronger sense of unity would come from Paris. It didn't. Where does that leave us? Governor Walz said, I have to entertain the idea about Trump. Maybe he's right. Ooh, that one hadn't occurred to me yet. Can we trust the U.S. to be there? I think we, since this weekend, have a clearer idea of what the answer to that question might be. But what does give me hope is also several things that he said. We all do better when we all do better. A wake-up call to strengthen those ties and how much Afghanistan and Idaho have in common. Who knew? So I think I will ultimately take hope from this evening, Governor Walz, and if only because there are still people like you in public service, in government. Thank you for that.
Are you ready? Focus. Yeah. You ready? I know the flag. You see, that's the new Minnesota flag. When we got power, we passed everything. The last thing we did was we had a racist flag, so we got rid of it and got a new one. So, yeah. My final thing is thanks to the folks who are up here from the John Adams Institute and to my two moderators who put up with me. One of the great things I get to do, I take a lot of crap as governor, but one of the authorities I have, and I'm pushing my authority, I kept telling you that in states' rights, I get to issue license plates. So, the John Adams Institute, Frank, from Minnesota, Van Zant. The only limitation is you cannot put them on a Tesla. That's the only thing. So. And somebody asked what you can do as states or whatever, and I am pressing the limit and testing this. I recognize that a U.S. passport isn't what it used to be, so we're issuing our own from Minnesota. So. Thanks, everybody.